Good evening and welcome to a special edition of our New India Rising series. It's 8 o'clock here on Sunday, and tonight we're going across continents with a single purpose in mind. It's been 3 years of the Modi government, 57 trips abroad that have occupied at least 45 countries. There has been a massive outreach on the diaspora and key achievements, not including just India's entry into the missile technology-controlled regime. Where does the Modi government stand in the eyes of the world as we look to the next 2 years in the run-up to the next election battle back here in home? We open up this conversation tonight to people who give us perspectives from across the globe. Rick Russo from the CSIS is joining us from Washington tonight. Ainar Tandon, a political economic commentator, is joining us from Beijing. Lord Meghnad Desai, peer and economist, is joining us via Skype. And I have with us Professor Madhav Nalapat, the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Professor Nalapat, I'm going to try to set this up, sir, with our foreign guests and then come to you. Lord Desai, you've seen, sir, now 3 years of the Modi government. There has been a massive attempt at making India a player at the global stage. Has that succeeded, and if so, where it has, sir?
I think you can definitely see the success in the way the attitude of the UK has changed regarding India. In India-UK relationships, there is no doubt that UK looks to India for support and help after Brexit than it used to before. India has opened up relationship eastwards with Japan, of course with China, but generally the look eastward policy has been good. Our friendship with America has stayed constant through the Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh years, and that has been strengthened now. I think India is as big a player now in foreign affairs as it was in Nehru's time. In between, it dropped, but now it's back at the top.
Is this Rick Russo? How is it being looked? We've had plenty of conversations, Rick, when Modi was there to meet President Obama, when Obama was here, and during the Trump inaugural. We are expecting the two of them to meet shortly. How is the Trump administration and the United States at large looking at India now?
Well, I think we've yet to figure out what the baseline for the new agenda for cooperation is going to look like. I think, going back to your previous question, when you think about what the baseline for the new agenda for cooperation is going to look like, I think, going back to your previous question, when you think about President Obama's worldview and outlook and key priorities, coming up with a global deal on climate change, and India was a critical player in that. So India was very much center stage on that big priority issue. But when you think about President Trump withdrawing from trade pacts, prosecuting the fight against ISIS, and I think a back and forth in terms of our relationship with China. So we've yet to, I think, really articulate from the administration what the new vision for the relationship with India is going to look like, because there's not a lot of overlap in what India is doing on the global stage right now versus our Tier 1 priorities. So the summit will certainly help us shape what that will be.
Okay, it's going to help us shape what that will be, but what should it be, Rick Russo?
Well, I mean, I think that the progress we've made in strengthening our defense partnership is crucial, and I hope that does continue and expand in the coming years. On the trade and economic relationship, our governments have really had big problems over many years. We're on opposite ends of most issues at the World Trade Organization. We've made no progress on securing an investment treaty, and small investor concerns on visas and on price controls in India. So there's real concerns on both sides. So I think they got to make sure that we don't move into a bumpy patch either on the trade side. So continue progress on defense and guard against, I think, some increased antagonism on the trade side. That to me would be the two big priorities.
All right. Ainar Tandon, we've also had several conversations on a myriad of topics over the past few weeks right here on NewsX with you, sir. What is the perception now, given India's concerns on Pakistan, given the fact that India did not show up for the OBOR inauguration, given the CPEC concerns, given the issues we've had over China not backing India on crucial issues like terrorism? There's a $50 billion trade deficit that we have with China. What is the worldview of Beijing, and where does India fit in it, sir?
Beijing is very concerned with its #1 priority, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. So at this point, India, in terms of where he wants to go, quite frankly, Modi very highly here in terms of his statecraft, his ability to craft a message. He really did put India back into play. There's no question about that. But what is the future of India, and how does it want to address its relationship with China?
Okay.
Almost unstoppable from the point of view of having the largest markets and populations in the world. They could be quite fit well together in terms of India has a huge young population, whereas China has an aging population. The question is, where does Pakistan lie? How big an impediment will that be?
Okay, so let me just, if you'll allow me, Mr. Tangent, just pick on this point, and I'm going to pick on it with Madhav Nalapat and then go across the world. And let's see for the next 15 minutes we can cover 3 issues. One is on Pakistan and terrorism. There is a differing view, Professor Nalapat, on Pakistan, on whether India should let its world policy, its foreign policy, be dictated through the prism of Pakistan, or whether it can be left behind. What should be the way forward, sir?
Well, quite frankly, Pakistan and economics is the driver of public perception. And whether it's Prime Minister Modi or President Xi or President Trump, they're going to be judged on jobs, they're going to be judged on income of their people. From that point of view, frankly, Pakistan is a very minor player so far as the calculus of India is concerned. East Asia is a much bigger player. The Gulf is a very big player. Europe and the United States are very big players. And you know, China, of course, is a very big player. So frankly, this obsessive interest in Pakistan, I think, is a little overdone, even in the case of India. And I don't think Prime Minister Modi has got that kind of obsession. He is now traveling across the world. He is building relationships across the world. And he has escaped from this India-Pakistan box to which some other powers wanted to put India in the past. Okay,
Meghna Desai, do you see that happen? Now, you're not a person who's just an economist, sir. You interact with world leaders. You're privy to conversations that take place at an international scale. Are you seeing that happening, that the prism, this box, like Madhav Nalapat calls, of looking at India's foreign policy from the prism of Pakistan, has that been broken?
No, I think India has to treat Pakistan like a constant but small irritant it can't get rid of. There are much bigger issues, as Professor Nalapat said, about growth, about trade, about our national security, about our access to nuclear material for supply. And we have to concentrate on those issues and not be deflected by Pakistan's policies towards India. Pakistan will always be there. He'll always have terrorism exported to India. But we have to rise above that. India is much bigger than Pakistan, and it ought to be acting at a much bigger stage.
Okay. Rick Russo, we've seen what's happened in Riyadh in just the past few days. There was an attempt for the Pakistani Prime Minister to meet with Donald Trump. That didn't happen despite Saudi pressure. He didn't even get a chance, in fact, to address the gathering, did Nawaz Sharif. How is Pakistan now being viewed, as you get it, from the establishment within Washington, sir?
Yeah, I think the U.S. Views on Pakistan have been evolving in recent years. We haven't seen them being able to play a positive role on reconciliation and a path forward in Afghanistan. American troops have been endangered, and there's a growing sense that obviously Pakistan has some role to play behind that. But you know, I'd actually take a step back and say probably Prime Minister Modi's engagement with the United States and laying out a roadmap for stronger security cooperation has also really increased India's voice in trying to get the United States to draw away from Pakistan. So some of it is realization, our own thinking about the role that Pakistan could potentially play. But also, part of the reason I think the U.S. has been tilting much more towards India is because India's put a lot more on the table. So good credit to the Modi government for that.
Okay, put a lot more on the table. Einar Tangent, should it be strange, given we know that Chinese support, Russian support, for regimes across the globe that sometimes have a very patchy record of dealing with terrorism and other global crises. Given Pakistan's known track record with terror, very serious concerns to say the least, why do you think it still enjoys the support that it does get from Beijing, sir?
Well, quite frankly, Pakistan is regarded as an old friend and a crucial part of what is considered their, we've talked about their crucial economic #1 priority, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, in terms of how that plays out with terrorism and things like that, obviously there are different points of view. I think Beijing is hoping that Pakistan will be able to rein in terrorism and control the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan and prevent the issues on. There was a blow to this, obviously, with the abduction of 2 Chinese people last week. There's going to be ongoing concerns. I don't think that even Beijing expects that there will be a smooth ride going forward. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is one hope that they have, but quite frankly, it is going to be very difficult to see a future in which extremism and terrorism does not play a role in the evolving development of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, so let's take this forward. Professor Nalapat, you began with the single premise that the memory of governments worldwide of those people in power is going to be decided, and the fates of them are going to be decided on their delivery for their citizens and their voters back home. We've seen big pushes, an approach, an outreach to the diaspora, a Make in India initiative that has been launched, a push to increase FDI. India, we would like to think, is one of the world's fastest growing economies, if not the fastest growing economy. Where do we take it over the next 2 years in our engagement with the world, sir?
Well, Rishabh, I'd like to point out that by almost any forecast, I mean, barring some totally unforeseen calamity, India is going to be one of the top 3 economies of the world. You're going to have China as #1, United States second, and India as #3. And that situation is going to continue for quite some time. The remaining 3 powers, I mean, Russia, Germany, Japan, they're going to be further and further behind the big 3 in terms of economics. But I would like to say that, it's not just foreign policy. Foreign policy has to be married to a domestic policy that promotes innovation, that frankly promotes a lot of the freedoms for corporates, for individuals, that keep the knowledge economy going at for corporates, for individuals, that keep the knowledge economy going at high speed. So we need to have a legislative structure which does away with a lot of the restrictions that are there today. We need to have a bureaucratic system that's less cumbersome. Prime Minister Modi has been working very hard at this, but it's still a work in progress. So I think his real big challenge is going to be domestic, setting the stage, frankly, for India to be a global powerhouse with the kind of growth rate over a generation that China has achieved since 1980.
Okay, a large part of it is going to be domestic, but Rick Russo, there have been a lot of missed opportunities. There was a missed opportunity with the civil nuclear deal. Nothing much came of it, not a reactor, if one has to put it that way, too much frustration, I know, within the United States as well. There has been a lot of talk and a lot of support. There are so many of your Fortune 500 CEOs that come from an Indian descent. Great visits, great business meetings have been held, but nothing much has come of it. Why do you think not?
Well, actually, I don't agree with that. I think that if you look at the numbers, if you look at U.S.-India trade, it actually went up by about 4% last year, which is pretty healthy considering the global headwinds. And foreign direct investment, India has become really the darling of the world. Although, for India, that means $40–50 billion of FDI in a year, whereas, China in its heyday was pulling in $120 billion. So we know that the high watermark globally is still above what India is hitting right now. But, by recent standards, India, the economy is growing. U.S.-India trade is growing, and foreign direct investment is growing. So I think the numbers are pretty good. When I talked before about some of the concerns and headwinds, that really is at the government level. We haven't been able to forge a common vision for how we're going to grow our economies together by cobbling together.
How does it work, Rick? What is the common vision? In a United States that's looking inwards right now to promote jobs, as you must, within your own mainland, that is questioning visa regimes right now within the administration. Where is the point of concurrence that you see economically?
Well, frankly, I don't know that we're going to have it right now, but I'm hoping that what we see in the United States on a retraction from trade is a little bit of a bump in the road. We saw that in the early days with President Obama. You remember when President Obama came into office, he pulled back from 3 trade agreements that were done, was slow-walking some other agreements, reopened our model investment treaty. But over the course of his administration, he actually launched 3 of the biggest trade agreements of all time. The trade agreement with Europe, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then the services agreement at the WTO. So, I think the United States may come back around and be more open to trade. Whereas in India, the concerns about trade integration and really kind of opening up via deals has been ever present. So I think the United States, hopefully this is a transitory phase that'll pass. With India, we hope that they'll see the upside to trade and really let India's most dynamic companies thrive by greater competitiveness and openness with other economies.
Meghna Desai, we have old-standing concerns, and the job losses in the Indian IT sector are perhaps symptomatic of that, of being the back office of the world, but not producing our own patents, not doing enough R&D, not becoming the entrepreneurs of the world. How do we break that?
Well, we need a much radical reform of our education system. It's far too learning by rote. It does not encourage originality. It does not encourage initiative. It does not promote people on the staff by the research output, but merely by seniority. We need a much bigger revolutionary education system than is on the cards right now. Everybody is concerned about teaching Sanskrit and the Vedas. What's really important is, do we have an R&D culture which innovates as much as China does? China has lots more patents filed than we have. We really ought to compare ourselves in that race with China and see whether we can do that or not. Because ultimately, the future of the world will depend on innovations, on new technology. All sorts of things are happening in artificial intelligence and in energy research. I think India has to really now change its educational philosophy and become much more innovative, much more intensive.
And let me pick on the point, sir. And let me pick on that point. I know, Tanjan, this is a challenge that has been faced by China in just the past decade. The Economist wrote an article a couple of issues ago that on quantum computing, if I can pick that topic from the list that Meghna Desai was telling us on and add that, of the 4,000 papers written, of the 6,000 papers written in the world, 3,500 were from the US, 1,000 plus was in China. From India, it was nil, 0. How do we go from becoming the back office, or how has China got it right, from becoming the manufactory of the world to the design capital of the world?
Well, I'm going to agree with my esteemed colleague, Professor Nalapat. India simply needs to be unleashed. You have all the raw material there. You have incredibly intelligent people. Yes, maybe educational reform is in order, but I quite frankly, I do think that it's about bureaucracies, current systems, and let us say, unleashing all of the talent that you have. I don't necessarily see this as a comparative issue. If you start looking in the United States, the number of people who are filing patents, you'll see quite a coincidence in that the names on those patents are Patel and Wong. So actually, India and China are leading the world in a lot of patents, because many of the patents that you refer to are not being done by Native Americans, or Americans who were born there, but by transplanted
that's an interesting point.
Who are either studying there. So in terms of doing that, you have the raw talent. It's simply creating
so let's pick on raw talent,
by which people can do it.
Madhav Nalapat, like it or not, never before in the history of the world, perhaps never again in the history, certainly in our times, will so many young people be in one country at one particular point of time. What do we do over the next few years to unleash that talent?
Well, one thing that needs to be done, as Lord Desai very eloquently put it, and Aina Tangen very correctly put it, is that these young people, their minds have to be given the opportunities to grow. Now, unfortunately, we have a system in India in which the HRD ministry, for example, its main obsession is micromanaging. Its main obsession is averaging. So you create a kind of a uniformity of syllabi, uniformity of standards, and you try and create a system which is completely bureaucratized. As bureaucratized, frankly, the Soviet Union was when there was a Soviet Union. Of course, there's almost no system now. But the reality situation is that, as Mr. Tangen correctly said, you have to unleash the potential of India. Now, take, for example, the state of Gujarat. I've gone to Gujarat multiple times. The Gujaratis hardly ever bother about the government in Gandhinagar or in Delhi. They work on their own. They are, in a sense, unleashed within India. Whereas you have some states in which they depend on the government for almost everything. So we have to ensure that there is a freedom for the citizen. And in this also, I would like to say, freedom of lifestyle, freedom of speech. These are also very important freedoms. So we have to create a culture of freedom to create a culture of excellence in India. I think that's going to be a big challenge to Prime Minister Modi. But I'm very confident that, knowing the record of Prime Minister Modi in Gujarat and over the last 3 years, that he will meet that challenge.
Okay, Lord Desai, for viewers who are watching here in India, how much are governments in Europe, is the government in transition in the UK looking at young people in India and understanding what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, what they aspire to? How important has that become for companies and governments in Europe, sir?
India is a very large
market for all companies which want to sell consumer goods. There is absolutely no doubt about it. India will continue to be a very large market, and lots of people are studying India for that purpose. You may have noticed how many internationally well-known pop singers are coming to India because they know the big audience is in India, and they're discovering that India is going to be important for many, many more years to come. So I think the world is taking interest in India, India's young people, India's consumption habits. Is India taking its own initiative into finding out what the world is doing? That is the important problem.
Okay.
We have to actually learn from the world.
Okay, so let me get a transatlantic perspective. Rick Russo, is the perception, and I'm not talking about the Indian state or the Indian government's policies, but the very fact that you're going to have about 600 million people that are much younger than I am in this one country at one time, for corporate America, for think tanks like yours, for the government that does research, for the Treasury, for the State Department, understanding young people in India and what they want and what they aspire to, how important has that become now?
It's critical. I think
in India and what they want and what they aspire to, how important has that become now?
it's critical. I think those of us that think about India 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future, you know, obviously an indispensable partner with the United States, and trying to figure out ways to bridge that gap, to make those connections. And when you have that kind of a vision over multiple decades, then you certainly need to engage and understand what do young people think. You know, myself, I mean, our State Department has taken me to India a number of times, spoken at dozens of universities and engaged with college students, trying to find out what's on their mind when they think about the United States and what they hope for from the relationship, so that, you know, people like me that have some level of influence with the government, even if I'm outside, can help to shape how does the United States choose to engage? What are the sectors? What are the areas? What are the topics? And make sure that it's something that would connect with India's youth, because, you know, that is the promise, that is the future, and that's the group that we really need to augment this base of support we've been building on today.
Okay, I'll leave my last word with Einar Tangen. Einar Tangen, will say the same thought to you. Now China still has a lot of young people that it needs to cater for, but we know recently there has been a dispute over population numbers and potential threats to falling population in China. How important, or does the government in Beijing consider this mass of 600 million people that are at some level to be unleashed upon to the world economy in the next few years? How important has this become for Chinese companies as an aspect of growth and for the government in Beijing?
Well, quite frankly, Beijing has to be looking at markets also. It's not just the internal market of China. I mean, the development of India will be absolutely crucial to regional development and stability. I don't think there's any question. But I think my colleague from the U.S. is dancing around one issue that we haven't talked about, the elephant in the room, in this particular case, Donald Trump, and what he represents in terms of going forward. India is going to have to decide whether the U.S.'s protectionist stance at this point is simply one man's attitude, or if it's a growing and creeping attitude that is going to be a part of the U.S. Attitude going forward. In terms of China, I think you can see quite clearly that they're looking for something that is more outgoing, more regional. And I think it's a question of how you embrace that. India's 600 million young people is clearly an asset that should be used. It should not be wasted. And as Dr. Nalapat has said, and our friend from London, it must be unleashed.
Okay. You know,
however,
I'm out of time. And I'll just qualify on Rick Russo's behalf. He was hopeful that the protectionist policies would change under the current regime. So I'll qualify that since I'm completely out of time. Gentlemen, for giving us this world perspective, not on how India sees the world, but how the world is looking at India right now on the 3rd anniversary of the present establishment back here in Delhi. Thank you for joining us from various centers right across the globe. Have a good day and a good night from wherever you are. We wrap up a special show coming up